What are some things that are in the news presently that have captivated us, that we're following as stories or issues? For example, on Wednesday, there was an article about indoor mask mandate. It's definitely all things mask mandate and vaccination are in my mind big time. And I just jotted down what and how are other pandemics that affected Greenfield. I realized, there have been pandemics during Greenfield's history, but I don't know that I know much about how they affected the people here. So that's one way that I could take today's headline and then go back and do a little research to see, okay, in 1918, in the flu epidemic, is there historical record about it hitting Greenfield or not? That would be a place to start. So I just thought we might share some other ideas about what we're paying attention to today and how we might kind of then cast our research net back to see what was in the public record about the same issues in some other time.
Do you have an answer to that, Doug?
I mean, this, I suppose, relates to what we just talked about with oral history, people's versions of what the truth is and how the world works, and individual stories and rights versus the rights of all of us. I have a right to not wear a mask. We have a right to be healthy. How do we wrestle with that?
Lindy, anything that you're in particular kind of following in the news these days?
No, I've been avoiding it like the plague.
We'll check in soon and see what we learn about that.
So, I'm really curious about whether you found out anything in your exploration here.
We did. We went in a couple different directions. When we met last on Zoom, we were looking at the question of what were some historical antecedents to Greenfield dealing with a pandemic. So my question was, what was the coverage, if anything, of Greenfield during the 1918 flu epidemic?
Yeah.
And Doug was more drawn to a different aspect of the research.
More of both the sort of tension between individual responses and societal impact and consequence. So the first, and I was pretty surprised by some of what I knew, some of it, and there were definitely surprises. And the first was going all the way back to George Washington during the Revolutionary War, where soldiers really pushed him to make sure that they got vaccinated against smallpox. He thought about he wasn't going to do it, and they insisted, basically. And of course, what that meant was taking a little pustule of smallpox and,
Rubbing it on yourself at this
or
point?
making sure it penetrated the skin. So you got a little bit of the smallpox itself, which would.
Yes.
So it was a little risky. I mean, the idea of taking one of those pustules, but they did that.
Had they already started using it as a weapon too? I mean,
well, not as part of that war. I mean,
Yeah,
that's something
yeah,
that,
but pre-
of course, the
Indigenous
European
people.
Americans brought infected blankets to the
Right.
natives and stuff. That was a different part of the story.
okay.
So then I just jumped way ahead, thinking about polio,
Yes.
because my lifetime, and the long lines of people waiting to get vaccinated. I mean,
Yes.
out the door, around the block, thank God. And there were headlines that said restrictive policies about, essentially mandates, restrictive policies, and then contrasting that with how restrictive the iron lung that people would be in that would help them breathe, which is even more restrictive.
Yes.
And then thinking about, and I started gathering information, but couldn't get a whole lot yet, of the incredibly long list of things people are required to be vaccinated for before they go to school, before they go into
Overseas.
the Army, before that. And that in each of these more modern times, there has been resistance. There have been people that, I don't want that. I don't want to get vaccinated. And so the tensions between what are the rights of everyone, I have the right to not be infected by you, and you have the right to make decisions about what you put into your body or not. That has been an ongoing conversation, and, you know, in more totalitarian places, that can be insisted on more easily than
Right.
here.
Right.
I started in a really personal place about the impact of the pandemic here because the Lava Center opened in January 31st of 2020, and then my headline here is COVID-19 comes to Greenfield, businesses close in March. So that was my starting point, and then I thought I would look up what the newspapers had to say about the Spanish flu, as we call it, that hit in 1918. Well, I lucked out because the Recorder actually did an article right at the beginning of the pandemic that looked back on their historical coverage. So one of the headlines from October 2 of 1918, so just about 102 years before COVID hit here, influenza with us. Epidemic has taken hold of Greenfield. And then on October 9th, all places of public assembly closed in Greenfield to control influenza. So, same story,
Yeah, right.
100 years
Repeat of
apart.
history.
I was also interested in the vaccination question, so I just looked up, as of 9:30, 63% of Greenfield's residents are fully vaccinated. And that kind of also, I don't have a card for it, but I noticed that there was a lot of discussion about should everybody in the area be observing the same protocols. So Greenfield has an indoor mask mandate, another town nearby is like not doing that yet, you know, it's sort of a patchwork. And so I found from the Greenfield Recorder of October 9th, 1918, a headline takes heavy toll, more than 800 epidemic cases now, week has seen heavy deaths lists, but new cases appear to be declining. Turner's Falls has also been hard hit. And then there's an excerpt from this article that says basically that we should be getting it together, you know, as a region. If closing the saloons and soda fountains is regarded as a proper precaution in Greenfield, it would seem that the same measures ought to be put into effect in every town in the county. If local boards will not take these greatly needed steps, it is time they were advised as to do their duty by the state health department. So once again, exactly the same
Same
issues,
thing we're
exactly
repeating.
the same issues. So we've got some things to put up on our timeline here.
That's great.
Doug,
Do it?
Let's see, here's a couple for 1918, and here's a couple for 2021. Doug, do you want to be the,
Vanna?
yeah. You know what, there's a typo on one of those. Hand me mine back, because I think
Well, it's influence instead of
yeah,
influenza.
influence.
Okay. So, let's see, 1918, I guess.
Just do this one over. Yeah.
We've got a couple here from the 50s and 60s. And just so you know, I've got George Washington over there. There's George.
And,
George
you
and
know,
the smallpox.
And when we get the session having to do with art and visual things, we can put up that picture of what George really looked like. Remember that?
Yes.
There we go.
We got one more.
So, everybody is invited to come to this table at Lava to add to our timeline. So, anything that you're curious about, if you want to think about something in the news today or recently, and then see if you can find something historical that kind of connects to it, bring it, come on down and make cards for it. Or if you just want to put yourself on the timeline, when you moved here, or when you were born here, or what happened here during your lifetime that you remember from having grown here through it as a historical event. Plenty of history's been around for you to live through. So come and share some of it on our timeline at the Lava Center, 324 Main Street, downtown Greenfield.
Thanks.